What people don't really understand is that both finance and AI are bubbles that will burst. Rather than banks issuing loans to companies, companies privately issue loans to other companies. And it's getting a lot of money from the GCC and other investors. The problem, of course, is what's happening in the war. Right? So this is what we can expect over the next 5 to 10 years, where Iran becomes much more theocratic and extreme and nationalistic. Israel abandons democracy and embraces theocracy. Why are people in finance fighting with people in AI? And there's a very good reason. Because if you're able to control Washington, D.C., if you're able to control the levers of government, you're able to make a lot of money for yourself, okay? So let's look at this concretely. What people don't really understand is that both finance and AI are bubbles that will burst. They're parasites, okay? So finance is a parasite because there's something called a private credit bubble, right? Private credit bubble, the idea of private credit is very simple. Rather than banks issuing loans to companies, companies privately issue loans to other companies. And you would think that these companies would be very careful with who they lend to and how much they lend to, right? That's not true though, okay? Why? Because in 2008, these banks destroyed the global economy and the American government bailed them out, right? They suffered no consequences. This idea of moral hazard. If you do not suffer consequences for your stupidity, well, you're just going to be more stupid in the future, okay? So these companies believe that we control Washington, D.C., therefore we can be as risky and stupid as we want. So they're giving out lots and lots of silly loans to companies because they collect a fee for these loans, right? And then when these loans don't actually work out, meaning the companies go bankrupt, what they do is they say, oh, we'll lend you some more money to keep afloat, okay? So now this problem has reached about $2 trillion. And so they think that, okay, well, worst case scenario, the government will bail us out if we all go bankrupt because we're too big to fail. And all our friends are in government. Okay? That's their mentality. And in 2008, that worked. But there's a problem today, which is there's also another group that's doing the same crap, okay? And it's called the AI bubble. All right, so if you look at AI bubble, you've got companies like Microsoft, OpenAI, Oracle, NVIDIA, okay, lots and lots of different companies. And the way they operate is they just lend money to each other, okay? It's like, I give you $1 billion, then you give me $1 billion, and now we have $2 billion. Okay? It's a circle jerk. And it's getting a lot of money from the GCC and other investors. The problem, of course, is what's happening in the war, right? So if the GCC can no longer put more money into this bubble, then eventually this bubble will have to burst. But they're like, that's okay. Why? Because we control Trump. We control the White House. We are the stock market. Therefore, Washington, D.C. will bail us out. Okay? So that's the war going on, where you have two parasitic forces, the finance sector and the tech sector, and they are all looking for government bailouts when their bubble bursts. But the government doesn't have infinite money. It can only bail out one side, right? So they're going to fight over with the government. They're going to fight over who bails who out, okay? If the Democrats can win the House and the presidency into 2028, then the private credit people will get bailed out. But if Trump and his people stay in power in 2028, then the AI people will get bailed out, okay? So that's the civil war going on in America right now. We'll discuss this more later in the future, but I just present to you right now, okay? And then, of course, you have the Israelis, Israel. People don't really appreciate how divided Israel is. This is about 2020 when you have like 1 million people in Tel Aviv calling for the resignation, the impeachment, the jailing of Prime Minister Netanyahu. Because Netanyahu, like most Israeli politicians is very corrupt. Okay? And to avoid going to jail, Netanyahu proposed changing the judiciary, changing the laws. And so there's these massive protests against Netanyahu. And at this point in Israel, it seemed as though Netanyahu was going to fall from power and go to jail for the rest of his life. But then, of course, October 7th happened. Okay? October 7th happened. And then Israel is now in permanent war that gives him emergency powers. Okay? All right. To give you a sense of how divided Israel is, let's look at the Knesset, which is a parliament. Guys, this is a lot of political parties. And as you can see, none of them are dominant. Okay? The biggest, Likud, which is Netanyahu party, it has about 30 members. But it cannot rule by itself, therefore it has to join with other political parties. Okay? It has to be a coalition. But you look at its enemies. Well, its enemies also have a lot. So it seems as though Israel is an extremely divided society, and it is. Okay? People don't really appreciate this. A lot of people talk about a Jewish global conspiracy. What people don't really understand is the Jewish people have never, ever gotten along. So you go back to the time of Jesus, and there were like 3 major factions in Jerusalem. They were the Sadducees, there were the Pharisees, and the Essenes. They all hated each other. In the year 70, the Romans sent a huge army to destroy Jerusalem. Okay? And you would think at this time, the people in Jerusalem would get together and unite and defend Jerusalem because otherwise they'd all be killed. Well, they didn't get together, okay? And the Romans destroyed Jerusalem and burned down their second temple and massacred a lot of Jews. So the Jews have always had this problem where they're extremely creative and intellectual, but that just leads to massive infighting. Okay? All right. So these are the leaders of the different political parties of Israel. And again, I hate to say this, but like they really hate each other. It's not, like a show. They generally hate each other. And that's why Israel has been politically so dysfunctional these past few decades. Okay? All right. So now I want to discuss where the major conflict in Israel is. Okay, so I would say there's like the 2 major conflicts is represented by Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. These are 2 cities in Israel, and they are the 2 major cities of Israel, and they represent 2 different centers of gravity, 2 different visions for Israel. Tel Aviv is democratic. Jerusalem is a theocracy, meaning it's religious. Okay? Tel Aviv is open, meaning it actually has a lot of homosexuals, right? And you can imagine people in Jerusalem aren't happy about this, so they're very conservative. Okay. Okay, cosmopolitan tradition. All right, so these are 2 vastly different visions for Israel, where Tel Aviv is this open, democratic, modern, progressive city. Lots of homosexuals, lots of open ideas, very secular, very outward-looking, very Western. Jerusalem is the complete opposite, okay? Very religious, very conservative. And they hate each other. And the fact that Tel Aviv is getting destroyed right now in this war, people in Jerusalem are actually okay with this, okay? They're not like, oh my God, they're killing Israel. No. Tel Aviv is the great Satan. Let's just destroy it so that we can build a theocracy. Okay, all right. So let's look closely at where they disagree, okay? So Israel is the kingdom of David. Okay? But Tel Aviv and Jerusalem perceive David differently. Okay? So for people in Tel Aviv, David was the king when Israel was at the height of its glory, when it was an open, cosmopolitan, creative, innovative empire. And that's what they want Israel to be. The people in Jerusalem see David as a different person. They see David as primarily a poet prophet. And they see David as the exemplar, as the favorite of God, because he redeemed himself and repented himself in the eyes of God, okay? So redemption and repentance, all right? And what they focus on is a story of David, where David is king, and one day he wakes up and finds he's in love with Bathsheba. And so he basically has sex with Bathsheba. Bathsheba gets pregnant, and that's a problem because Bathsheba is married to someone else, Uriah the Hittite. So what does David do? David has him killed, okay? And David can do this because he's king. But God finds out and sends the prophet Nathan to tell David, you've sinned. And at first, David refuses to admit that he's in the wrong. But then his child with Bathsheba dies. And David falls into tremendous grief. And every day he's praying to God for forgiveness. He's asking for redemption. He is repenting. And God forgives him. And in this process, not only does David become a better person, but he becomes united with God. Because now they're best friends. Now they talk every day. And that's what the vision that people in Jerusalem have for Israel. A nation that engages in redemption and repentance. They don't care about this war. They don't care about Iran. They don't care about the United States. They don't care about the Greater Israel Project. They care about the Jews finding God again and being loyal to God. And that is what will bring peace to the world, okay? That is how they see the world. This is how they perceive things. They believe that in every person, there's a divine soul, okay, that comes from God. But it is trapped in the animal soul, okay? So Tel Aviv is the animal soul. And this is divine soul. All right? So what the animal soul is, you seek material comfort. You want to have sex. You want to get drunk. You want to party. You want to drive a Ferrari. Okay? This is all animal. But inside of you is the divine soul that only seeks to be with God. Okay? And so we are constantly in a struggle between the animal soul and the divine soul. And so from their perspective, Tel Aviv represents the animal soul of Israel. Jerusalem represents the divine soul of Israel. So it's okay if the Iranians destroy Tel Aviv. Good. Also, they recognize that war is good because if people really want to find God again, they need to suffer. They need to lose everything before they recognize the glory of God, okay? So think of the book of Job. When Job is a character in the Bible who's very wealthy. And so God decides, you know what? Maybe he's only faithful to me because he's very wealthy. So Job loses everything, and this heightens his faith in God. Okay? So that's the vision that these crazy religious zealots have in Jerusalem, which is like, let's destroy Israel so that we can rediscover our love for God, okay? The destruction of Israel will lead to the redemption and repentance of the Israeli people, and therefore peace in this world. The Messiah will finally come. That's why the rabbi was constantly talking about on Thursday the Messiah will come because he feels it's so close. There's so much destruction. There's so much war. So the Messiah must come because now the Jews recognize that only God can save them. Therefore, when you will it, when you pray for the Messiah, when you really want in your heart, that's when the Messiah will come. Okay? But you need to create the conditions when people really want the Messiah. Okay? So that's a civil conflict going on in Israel. And again, these people in Jerusalem, these fanatics, they don't really care if the world is destroyed because this world is fake anyway. Who cares? What matters is the divine soul. Okay? So now I want to talk about Iran. Okay? This is the political government structure of Iran. Now, one thing to notice is that it's very complicated. Okay, it's divided into the religious aspects, okay, assembly of experts, and the secular aspect, which is the government. Okay, so it's a government, but the Islamic clerics are at the very top, and this is a dual identity of Iran. Okay, and this is their last presidential election. And as you can see, it's a pretty divided country, where people in the middle voted for Jalali, but people in the outskirts voted for Pezeshkian, okay? So there's a lot of conflict in Iran, not just political, religious, but also ethnic as well. All right, so let me explain very quickly what I see is the major divide in Iran, okay? So of course you have the Islamic theocracy, and they're in conflict with secular nationalists. And now of course there's ethnic groups as well. I don't really think the ethnic groups matter that much, okay? What really matters is a conflict between the secular nationalists and the Islamic theocracy. Right? So basically the rural-urban divide. People who are well-educated and want to see Iran as a secular state that promotes democracy and progress in science versus these religious individuals, okay? Now, what happens is that in a war, you become more extreme. So what will happen is that the Islamic theocracy will transition into Shia eschatology or martyrdom, okay? Where they think that this war is about having the 12th Imam, Mahdi, who is basically the Messiah, return to lead them to war against the great Satan, which is Israel and the United States, okay? So over time, the Islamists will become much more radical. This will force the secular nationalists to also become much more radical as well. So they will become Persian exceptionalists, okay? And what this means is that Persian exceptionalism, which just means that Persia is the greatest civilization in human history, and therefore it is worth dying for. It is worth fighting for. The survival of the Persian civilization is much more important than the survival of the Iranian state. Okay? So the great question for the Iranians is, are they able to reconcile the differences between these two strands of the culture? Or will this lead to civil war in Iran? Okay? We are seeing civil war in Israel. We're seeing civil war in America. Iran cannot afford to fight a civil war at this time because they're being bombarded by two very powerful nations, the Israel and America, okay? But unfortunately, the law of proximity teaches us that people are much more interested in their own internal conflict than the outside global conflict, okay? And so this understanding now gives us, helps us answer the three big questions of today, right? How are these leaders getting killed? Why are they getting killed? And what will this mean for the rest of the world, okay? And so the first two questions, how are they getting killed? Why are they getting killed? They're getting killed because of these civil conflicts within these nations, okay? These different factions are providing intelligence to their enemies in order to limit their internal enemies, right? That's, again, I don't have evidence, but I think according to game theory, that's the best explanation for how these leaders are getting killed. Because again, it's not that easy as a foreign nation to identify the location precisely of that leader, okay? And what we're seeing in this war is both the Iranians and the Israelis are doing a very excellent job of killing each other's leaders. And that's not actually common. Right? So I think this civil conflict within these nations offers the best guide, the best understanding of why this is happening. Okay. Now, the third question is, where's the world going? As you can see from these conflicts, it seems as though the world can only become much more theocratic in the end. Okay. So what's happening is, at the end of the day, this war in Iran, in the Middle East, it's really a war between two different competing visions of the world. Okay? You have the global secular financial order, okay? And this is the world that we live in today. And they're fighting against a nationalist theocracy. Theocratic order. All right? So this is what we can expect over the next 5 to 10 years, where Iran becomes much more theocratic and extreme and nationalistic. Israel abandons democracy and embraces theocracy. America will also abandon democracy and embrace theocracy, because that is the general trend of the world. Okay?